Hello, welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra, and these are the key global headlines we are tracking this evening. After staying out of power for over a year, Benjamin Netanyahu makes a dramatic comeback as Israel's Prime Minister. After 5 elections in less than 4 years, Israel is likely to have a stable government for the first time since 2019. Massive protests by Pakistan's Tehreek-e-Insaf supporters after former Prime Minister Imran Khan was attacked during a rally in Punjab province yesterday. The man suspected of shooting Khan remains in police custody. Imran Khan is currently being treated at a Lahore hospital and remains out of danger. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz meets Chinese President Xi Jinping, making him the first leader of the G7 nations to visit China since Xi got a third term in office. Reports say Scholz urged President Xi to use China's influence on Russia to end the war with Ukraine. Russian attacks leave 4.5 million Ukrainians without electricity. Ukraine President Zelensky accuses Vladimir Putin of energy terrorism, says the Ukrainian army continues to reclaim territory in eastern and southern regions. First up, India and UK have restarted talks to seal the long-awaited free trade agreement. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson had earlier assured that both countries will be able to finalize the agreement by Diwali. So what has been the reason for this delay, and what are the hurdles that both nations need to overcome? CNBC-TV18 Sanjay Suri brings us a report on what's holding back the FTA.
For Britain, this is above all about Scotch whisky. It wants higher quotas and reduced tariffs. India is the world's biggest market for whisky and the second biggest for Scotch whisky. It imported 136 million bottles of Scotch last year. Not enough for the Scots. The government in Britain has been pressing long and hard over this issue, and as it turns out, successfully, at least in the earlier draft agreement. India is believed to have accepted British demands for reduced tariffs and higher quotas on Scotch whisky. For India, the prime demand is over migration. It wants greater ease for its students and professionals to move into Britain and to work and live here. A negotiating position that some are finding inexplicable, that India should offer to open up its markets to more and cheaper Scotch whisky and other British goods, and in return, Britain should take more and more of its best and brightest. Britain is resisting this Indian move. It is asking for a quid pro quo here, that it will accept this demand on condition that India takes back more and more undocumented Indian migrants settled in Britain.
Let me just say that both sides are working sincerely on the FTA. The issue also came up, as you are aware, during the phone conversation between Prime Minister and the new UK Prime Minister.
And now fresh worry has arisen over the issue of generic drugs. A leaked draft of the earlier agreement in the FTA on this aspect of the deal shows that Britain is pushing for continuing patents for its pharma firms for a number of drugs. India, on the other hand, is the world's largest producer of generic drugs, and millions of poor people around the world live on this. It's a lifeline for them. Medicines Sans Frontier has warned that any limitation on this production could be devastating for the health of millions around the world.
When India is considering the proposals that the UK has put on the table, which seeks to expand more monopolies in India, what we are going to see is a more restrictive supply, not only for patients in India, but globally. And this is why the UK-India FTA is really a dangerous proposal that needs to be rejected outright by India.
All right, let's also get you news from India's neighborhood now. Two of India's adversaries are cementing their relationship. While India prepares for its global leadership, China and Pakistan are huddling together to strategize their next moves. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif was among the first global leaders to visit China after Xi took over for an unprecedented third term. What's bringing the two countries together, and what does it really mean for India's territorial integrity? Madhiha Mujawar looks at all the growing alliance and the impact on India.
The last 1 year has seen China and Pakistan's relationship get more deeper than ever. While India expands its ties with the Western world, the country's immediate neighbors and stark rivals are strengthening their bond further. In a latest display of that growing friendship, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif became the first foreign leader to visit China to congratulate Xi Jinping on his landmark victory for the third term. The two leaders agreed to deepen cooperation in areas of training, joint military exercises and military technology. Previously in March, Pakistan also exhibited China-made weapons and fighter jets in their National Day parade. Geopolitical experts see this narrative as China's message to India.
Pakistan and India do have this permanent sort of a problem, and China, in that sense, continues to take advantage of this problem vis-a-vis their bilateral relations. So it tries to act in a way that India continues to be perturbed, because China essentially aims at India being confined to the South Asian region. Pakistan is in no position to negotiate at the moment. It is essentially with the begging bowl. They are going wherever they can because the economy is in a terrible shape and they need support.
In the joint statement during Pakistan PM's visit to China, both countries reiterated their support on issues concerning their core interests. While China reaffirmed support to Pakistan's sovereignty, territorial integrity and security, Pakistan backed the One China policy and extended support on issues like Taiwan, South China Sea, Tibet and Hong Kong.
China has been supportive of Pakistan in more ways than one, including helping Pakistan develop weapons of mass destruction. Pakistan acts as a Chinese proxy, and China does Pakistani bidding, and that is where we have difficulties, because, as I said, that targets India and is against Indian interests.
The growing association is not restricted to just military support. China is funding numerous infrastructure projects in Pakistan under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The CPEC is a transport corridor that passes through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The two countries have now agreed to enhance the corridor to Afghanistan, and this is seen as China's bid to expand its reach. India has raised its objections. The Ministry of External Affairs has said any projects in POK are illegal and any third country's involvement will directly infringe on India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. In Mumbai, Madiha Mujawar.
All right, let's move on to Myanmar now. It's been nearly 2 years since the military there deposed the civilian leadership and took power. The army has cracked down violently on peaceful protests. Ethnic groups have taken arms against the military, and there is no sign of negotiations towards a truce. Matthew Thomas reports on the unrest across Myanmar and its implications for India.
21 months since the military took power through a coup, civil war is raging in Myanmar. Last week, the military airstrikes on a concert held by a rebel faction led to the death of 80 civilians. All of them belong to the minority Kachin ethnic group. Unfortunately, this is just one of the several acts of violence against citizens that's becoming a daily occurrence. More than 2,400 people have been killed and over 16,000 arrested since the coup, according to local monitoring groups.
We're seeing crimes against humanity and war crimes being committed on a daily basis. We've also seen, for instance, attacks against schools and churches, bombing campaigns. We've seen targeted burning of settlements by the Myanmar military.
This, however, hasn't stopped the protests. It all began on the 1st of February 2021. An exercise instructor inadvertently captured a military convoy reaching the parliament to arrest then-state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. Alleging voter fraud and threat to national security, the military junta deposed the elected leaders and assumed power. Soon after the military took power, the National Unity Government began peaceful demonstrations. But after a violent crackdown by the military, the country's ethnic groups began to support armed resistance by providing funds and training.
The Myanmar military, I think, is probably losing ground to the opposition that they face across the country. But the Myanmar military, of course, is not going to concede that, and they're not going to back down. So I expect that we're going to see significant increases in rights abuses.
Despite the escalating violence, peace talks are currently non-existent. The Myanmar army and the ethnic groups do not trust each other historically, and that continues. These groups believe that the military government will have to make concessions to even begin negotiations. Globally, the United Nations has outsourced resolution to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, but there is no consensus in the 10-member body.
It is a big problem here. And with ASEAN split because of ASEAN's rules where, one state can exercise effective veto authority, it becomes very difficult to do anything.
Language of threats and coercion against this very proud nation and a very powerful institution, progress may not be easily achieved.
Experts say that Russian weapons used in Ukraine are also killing people in Myanmar.
Russia is the primary weapons seller. And they're selling the weapons that are particularly important for the Myanmar junta, which is helicopters, jet planes, and things like that.
With China openly backing Myanmar's military rulers, India is forced to walk the tightrope. The states of Mizoram and Manipur share a long border with Myanmar and even saw an influx of refugees when the military took power.
India is very much strongly advocating the return of Myanmar to the earlier path of transition to democracy. At the same time, being a realistic practitioner of policy, it is clear that there is a government, and therefore the idea is to keep doing business with that government.
As the civil war rages in Myanmar, people are bearing the brunt, and there is no sign of peace or even talks to achieve some sort of truce. In Mumbai, Matthew Thomas.
Right, the world, of course, watching the situation in Myanmar very closely. Let's get to our big focus now. Benjamin Netanyahu has made a comeback as Prime Minister of Israel after his right-wing coalition won 64 out of 120 seats in the Knesset. Netanyahu defeated the sitting Prime Minister Yair Lapid, his staunchest rival. The longest-serving Prime Minister Netanyahu will now head the most right-wing government in Israel's 74-year history. Let me go across to Iran Edzion, non-resident scholar at Middle East Institute. Thank you very much for joining us, Iran. Tell us what really worked in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu. How was he able to come to power with such a strong majority? Who was the kingmaker for him?
Well, it's not really such a strong majority. If you look closely at the numbers, a few thousand votes here and there would have made a tremendous difference because of the intricate composition of Israel's electoral system. It's obviously not like the American system, but the difference between the popular vote and the final outcome is significant. However, he was able to do it, Netanyahu, first of all, because he is a master politician. As you said, he's been around for the longest time, even more than Ben-Gurion. He has been prime minister, not consecutively, but 16 years, which is obviously a huge number in Israeli terms, in every term maybe. And he's very savvy in the art and practice of political campaigns. So this is number one. Number two, as always, one needs a particular combination of circumstances, including mistakes made by the other side, who failed to galvanize as a ruling coalition and to do what is necessary in order to win elections. The campaign that Lapid ran was pretty poor. Other parts of his ruling coalition did not perform very well in the campaign. And ultimately, they lost a whole left-wing party called Meretz, which was in the Knesset for decades. And it's the first time that it fell out because it failed to cross the electoral threshold of 3.25%. It missed about 4,000 votes altogether in order to do it. So, as I said, a combination of skill, luck, and a particular moment in history, because what is happening in Israel is not unlike the nationalistic populist wave, which is sweeping across many countries, including countries like Hungary, Poland, the US. We'll see what happens in the midterms, but it looks like there's going to be a red wave there too. So Israel is not an isolated island. And Netanyahu
Iran, if I may ask you, this is being called the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. What will this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu's policies domestically and his foreign policy?
Yeah, I think there's no question that this characterization is true. It is the most rightist, hard right, extreme right government we ever had. For the first time, there is a very significant party that sits in that coalition, which is openly racist, comprises of bigots, some of them with a dark history of allegations and even trials for accusations for support of Jewish terrorism, for racism against Arabs, and so on. Many of them did not chose not to serve in the IDF, in the Israeli army, or were even rejected by the IDF at the time because of their extreme views, as absurd as it sounds these days. And some of them are going to be cabinet members in very sensitive positions. So it is an unprecedented phenomenon in our history. And the overall shift to the right that has happened in Israeli politics basically since Yitzhak Rabin was murdered 27 years ago, almost to the day, November 4. This movement to the right is now culminating in the creation of the rightist ever Israeli government, comprising of ultra-Orthodox, ultra-nationalists, bigots, racists, and led by Netanyahu and his Likud party, which is now finding itself as more of a center-right or right-of-center party, surrounded by parties that are either more rightist or more ultra-Orthodox.
Iran, we're running out of time. I'll ask you one quick question about the corruption trial against Netanyahu. What happens to that now? How will he counter that?
That's an important question that everybody is asking. Nobody obviously has the answer. He denied during the campaign when he was confronted with the question, what are you going to do about your trial? Will you try, if you're prime minister, will you try to somehow stop the procedures, annul the procedures, do all sorts of tricks in order to halt the process? He denied it. But some of his partners openly said that they're going to do exactly that. So we'll have to wait and see. There is obviously a huge question if such a procedure is even legal, possible. Will it withstand scrutiny by Israel's Supreme Court? It's going to be an interesting point to watch.
All right. Thank you very much, Iran Itzian, for joining us here, giving us your view on the Israel election and significance of Benjamin Netanyahu coming back. We're going to take a short break, but coming up, we take a deep dive into the US midterm elections and why the inner circle of Donald Trump may actually be planning for a 2024 election bid. A special conversation with Ali Wine, senior analyst at the Eurasia Group, coming up.
Get the grip of good health even after 50. Presenting now, Star Health Premier Insurance Policy. Always at your doorstep.
How about listening to global market maestros before crafting your investment strategy? How about getting deep insights into their businesses from top Indian honchos before putting your money on the line? How about making every trading day profitable with strategies from the market masters, macro pundits, and chart wizards? Only one show gives you a head start to your trading day. Get ready to profit. Get ready for business with Bajar at these times on CNBC-TV18 and CNBC-TV18.com.
For promoting better banking and business practices in the jewelry industry, Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council hosted the annual Banking Summit. Catch all the highlights of GJEPC presents Gem and Jewelry Banking Summit 2022 at these times only on CNBC-TV18. Presented by GJEPC.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. The crucial US midterm elections are set to take place on the 8th of November. All 435 seats in the House of Representatives, 35 out of 100 seats in the Senate will be decided, along with races for the post of Secretary of State, Attorney General and other state and territorial elections. Republicans have a clear edge in the midterm election. In fact, the Axios agency is reporting that former President Donald Trump is discussing announcing the launch of a 2024 presidential campaign on the 14th of November. This is in the backdrop of a strong showing by more than a dozen Trump-backed candidates in this election. Let's now go across to Ali Vine, senior analyst at the Eurasia Group. Ali, how will this election impact Joe Biden's foreign policy agenda?
Most likely Republicans will retake the House. There's a good chance that Republicans will retake the Senate as well. And if they do, it's not only President Biden's domestic policy agenda that will face difficulties, but also his foreign policy agenda. Right now, of course, we have deepening ideological acrimony in Washington. It makes it hard to pass legislation. It makes it hard to get initiatives stood up abroad. And I think that having said that, I think that there are some areas in which, regardless of the outcome of the midterms, we will see a fair bit of continuity. And I think, one area in particular is China. In Washington, folks don't agree on much, but there is a roughly bipartisan, maybe not consensus, but something approaching a bipartisan consensus in Washington that the United States needs to compete more aggressively with China, militarily, economically, technologically, diplomatically. So I think that regardless of which way the outcomes go, I think that the president's ambitions to push back against Chinese influence, I think that those initiatives will continue. I think that we will also see continued bipartisan support for strengthening America's relationship with India. That's also a bipartisan priority. I think one foreign policy area where we might begin to see some fissures will be on U.S. policy towards Ukraine. If you look at, for example, just within the Republican Party, differences between the likely, if Republicans retake the House, the likely next leader of the Republican House, Kevin McCarthy, and Senator McConnell. Senator McConnell has been very full-throatedly supportive of continuing support, military support, and other forms of support for Ukraine. Representative McCarthy has been a little bit more circumspect, and he said recently that the United States should not be writing more blank checks. So that divide could emerge over Ukraine, and I think that there's a growing weariness, I think, in Washington over how does this war end? The Russia-Ukraine war is now ending. It's now entering rather a much more escalatory, unpredictable phase. Okay. So I think that one foreign policy area where, entering into next year, depending on the midterms, where we might begin to see some cracks and some more difficulties for the president's agenda will be on continuing to support Ukraine.
Right. We have seen very close U.S. involvement in the Ukraine-Russia war so far. Do you think that post the 8th of November, there will be greater scrutiny in domestic politics about U.S. involvements, about Joe Biden's Ukraine plan? And would Joe Biden like to remain so involved post the 8th of November?
So the president has made clear, and the president's top national security officials have made clear that they regard the fight for Ukraine not only as a European problem, but really as a global problem. And they have framed Russia's invasion of Ukraine as really pitting autocracies versus democracies. You often hear President Biden come back to this narrative of democracies versus autocracies. So I think that the president and his top officials, they view the Russia-Ukraine war within a much wider global effort. They want to continue supporting Ukraine. They want to continue supporting Ukraine's ability to resist Russian aggression, but they also want to ensure that the United States doesn't find itself in a direct military confrontation with Russia that could potentially escalate to the nuclear level, which would be a horrifying scenario. So the president and his team, they have a very difficult balancing act. I do think that the president and his team would like to continue supporting Ukraine. They would like to continue supporting Europe's effort to diversify away from Russian energy. But again, they want to ensure that they cap escalatory potential for the Russia-Ukraine war. So a very difficult set of objectives, but I think that the president thus far has done a good job of balancing those objectives of ensuring that Ukraine can defend itself. We've been increasing our military assistance to Ukraine, but without entering into a direct armed confrontation with Russia.
All right. I would also like to ask you, do you expect the United States to go harder when it comes to sanctions on Iran and Russia post the midterm elections, and also countries which are trading with these countries or buying oil from these countries as of now?
I think we will see growing pressure. If you look at not only a growing pressure individually on Russia, sanctions pressure on Russia, and growing sanctions pressure on Iran, but I think that there's growing fear and growing apprehension and anxiety in Washington over a deepening relationship between Russia and Iran. And it's not only a deepening energy relationship; it's also a deepening military relationship. If you look at the drones that Russia is using right now in Ukraine, increasingly those arms are coming from Iran. So the United States is increasingly concerned not only about Russian aggression in Ukraine, it's increasingly concerned about Iranian support for that aggression, increasingly concerned about this deepening relationship between Russia and Iran. So I think that we'll continue to see a growing sanctions pressure. The question is, what impact will those sanctions have individually on Russia and Iran and also on their partnership? There are some observers who feel that the more that the United States and the West more broadly sanctions Russia and Iran, the more that those sanctions, one, could actually drive Russia and Iran closer together, but could potentially have some boomerang effects. Keep in mind that right now, the United States, and no country for that matter, makes foreign policy decisions in a political vacuum. A lot of American consumers right now, they're worried about high energy prices, they're worried about persistent inflation, and there are a growing number of economists who think that 2023 could be a year of a global recession. And so if we do have a global recession, if we have persistent inflation, we may well face pressure from the American public, from Western publics more broadly to say, hey, we need to bring this war to an end. We need to make a renewed diplomatic push. But I would expect for the time being, the United States to up its sanctions pressure on Russia and Iran, although we've seen that Russia, even though those sanctions, I think that over the medium term and the long term, even though I think that those sanctions will begin to cut into Russia's growth outlook, what we've seen is that in the short term, Russia has been able to take advantage of high energy prices. It's been able to institute capital controls. It's been able to reroute its supplies of energy. And so what we find is that at least in the short term, not only have sanctions not deterred Vladimir Putin from proceeding further with his aggression, but Russia has actually been able to reroute energy supplies to China, to India, to others, and it's actually been able to increase its exports of oil and increase its oil revenue. And so that outcome is obviously concerning for the West.
All right. Thank you very much, Ali, for joining us. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. News continues on CNBC-TV18. Stay tuned.